Watch a player walk off the pitch at this World Cup. Look closely at the back of his neck, right where the collar meets the spine. There's a bump, small, black, almost invisible under the jersey, unless you know exactly where to look. That bump is a piece of technology that, for almost the entire history of organized football, was illegal. Not a gray area, not a loophole, banned outright by the people who run the game. And right now, every single player on every one of the 48 teams at this World Cup is wearing one, hidden under the kit, recording close to 1,250 data points about that player's body every second of the match. So what changed? Why is something that used to get a player pulled off the field now sitting under every jersey in the tournament? And what exactly is it learning about these players while you're watching them run? Stick around. This one's stranger than it sounds. I'm Leo. Welcome to Footy Leo, the show where we dig into the stuff happening at this World Cup that nobody bothers to explain to you. Not the goals, not the highlights, the part underneath. The mechanics, the decisions made behind closed doors that quietly change what you're watching on the pitch. Today, we're talking about something that's been sitting on every player's back for over a decade, and almost nobody outside the sport knows what it actually is. Go back and watch a replay, any replay. Look at a player right after he scores, right when he rips off his jersey to celebrate. For half a second, before the referee waves a yellow card at him for it, you'll catch it. A black, skin-tight vest underneath. Tight enough that it looks like part of his body. That vest has a name. Most national teams use one called Apex, made by a company called Stat Sports. There's a small pod, about the size of a phone charger, slotted into a pocket between the shoulder blades. Inside it, GPS, tracking a player's position down to a few centimeters. Accelerometers, measuring how fast he speeds up and slows down. Gyroscopes, reading the rotation of his body. Magnetometers, reading which direction he's facing. None of this is new technology. Athletes have worn GPS trackers in training for over 20 years. Coaches have always wanted this data. What's strange is that for almost the entire history of organized football, using it in an actual match was against the rules. Not discouraged, banned. Written into the laws of the game as prohibited equipment, in the same category as jewelry or anything that could hand one player an edge nobody else had access to. A sport built around a ball and two goals spent over 100 years refusing to let players wear a tracking device, even though every team wanted one. Even at the World Cup in Brazil in 2014, the year before everything changed, players trained in these vests every day, then took them off before kickoff. So what flipped the switch? February 2015, the International Football Association Board, the people who write football's rulebook, quietly approved electronic tracking for official matches. A few months later, the Women's World Cup kicked off in Canada, and for the first time in the tournament's history, players were allowed to wear this tech during a real competitive game. No headlines, no press conference. One year, the vest was illegal equipment. The next, it was standard kit. And once it became legal, it didn't just get adopted, it exploded. Within a few years, you'd struggle to find a single elite squad on Earth not using one. Which raises the real question. Why did a rule that held for over a century suddenly collapse in a matter of months? Because once you start pulling that thread, you realize that this was never really about fairness. Here's the thing nobody tells you about that vest. It's not really tracking how a player moves. It's tracking how much a human body can take before it breaks. Every second a player is on the pitch, that little pod between his shoulder blades is firing off somewhere around 1,250 readings. Not 1,250 over the course of a match, 1,250 every single second. Speed, distance, the exact moment his foot hits the ground after a jump, the force running through his knee the instant he gets clipped in a tackle. Put that next to a stopwatch and a notepad, which is basically what scouting looked like 20 years ago, and you start to understand why this technology was so contested. It doesn't just describe the game, it quantifies a body in a way a human eye never could. Take the 2018 World Cup in Russia. Denmark's Christian Eriksen played 3 group stage matches. The vest data showed he covered just over 36 kilometers across those 3 games, more ground than any other player in the tournament. Nobody watching at home noticed that. The broadcast doesn't show it. But his coaching staff knew it in real time, down to the kilometer, and used it to decide exactly how hard they could push him in the next match without breaking him. That's the part that should sit with you for a second. This isn't a highlight reel stat. It's a body being read like a piece of machinery mid-tournament, while the cameras are pointed somewhere else entirely. Think think about what that actually means for a player. He doesn't get to feel tired and quietly hide it anymore. The vest already told someone on the bench exactly how tired he is, in numbers, before his legs even start to slow down on screen. There's no bluffing your way through the back half of a World Cup when something strapped to your own back is reporting the truth in real time.
Brazil's medical staff did something similar in that same tournament. Before the team even landed, their fitness coach flew across Europe, sitting down with the people managing their biggest stars at their club teams, gathering months of this exact data: body composition, injury history, training load. By the time the World Cup started, the coaching staff didn't just know how their players played, they knew almost to the percentage point how much each man's body had left in the tank. So no, this was never really about fairness. A locker room with this data has an advantage no amount of talent alone can close. It's the difference between guessing when a player is about to break down and knowing it 3 days before it happens, which is exactly why, once the ban lifted, nobody wanted to be the team without it. Once the ban lifted in 2015, this stopped being a football story and became a business story. Fast. Within 3 years, there wasn't one company making these vests anymore. There were several, all competing for the same locker rooms. StatSports, the Irish company behind Apex, ended up supplying most of the Premier League and the Championship in England. Catapult, a rival, took a different route, pushing hard into the American market, where soccer was growing and nobody had locked in loyalty to a single brand yet.
By the time this World Cup rolled around, hosted across the US, Mexico, and Canada, that timing wasn't a coincidence. The technology and the tournament grew up in the same place at the same moment. But here's where it stops being simple. You can't just strap any tracking device on a player and call it legitimate. FIFA built an entire approval system around this, quietly, starting in 2017. It's called the Quality Program. Every device has to pass through it before a team is allowed to use it in an official match. First, safety testing, making sure the hardware itself can't injure a player on impact. Then, starting in 2019, accuracy testing. How close is the GPS data to the player's real position? How reliable is the speed reading at full sprint versus a slow jog? Companies that pass get something close to a stamp of approval. A public ranking, available for anyone to look up, showing exactly how precise their system is at different speeds, from a walking pace all the way up to a full sprint. It sounds bureaucratic. It isn't. It's the difference between a coaching staff making decisions off real data and making decisions off something closer to a guess wearing a GPS label. Most fans have no idea this ranking even exists.
But every federation's medical and performance staff checks it, the same way you check a review before trusting a product with something that actually matters. And once that system existed, the gap between teams who could afford the best version of this technology and teams who couldn't became impossible to ignore. A wealthy federation isn't just buying a vest, it's buying the most accurate version of a player's body, updated every second, cross-checked against a public accuracy ranking most fans have never heard of. A smaller federation gets the same rules, the same right to wear the technology, but not necessarily the same resolution on the data coming back. Same sport, same rule book, very different picture of what's actually happening inside each player's body. Which brings up the part nobody really talks about. If this data is good enough to tell a coaching staff exactly how much a player has left in the tank, what else is it good enough to tell them, long before that player ever steps onto a World Cup pitch? Here's the answer. It doesn't just tell them what a player has left in the tank during a match, it tells them who's worth signing in the first place. And that part starts a lot earlier than you think. In 2022, Arsenal invited 22 kids, some as young as 14, to a trial at the Emirates Stadium.
Standard academy stuff, on the surface. Except part of how those kids got selected wasn't a coach's eye watching them play. It was their numbers, pulled from the same kind of vest worn by professionals, run through the club's own branded version of the app. Distance covered, sprint counts, acceleration data. A 14-year-old's body reduced to a spreadsheet before he's even old enough to drive. Sit with that for a second. We're not talking about a World Cup star anymore. We're talking about a kid who hasn't finished growing, being measured by the exact same standard as a finished elite athlete, because the technology doesn't know the difference between a body that's done developing and one that isn't. And once a club has that data on a player, it doesn't go away. It follows him. Every training session, every reserve match, every loan spell, all of it feeding into a profile that exists long before he ever wears a senior national team jersey. By the time a player walks out for his country at a World Cup, somebody, somewhere, has likely been watching his numbers for the better part of a decade. That changes what scouting even means. It used to be an art. A guy in the stands with a notebook, trusting his gut about a kid's first touch, his decision-making, the things he can't quantify.
Now, it's increasingly a numbers game, run by the same vest that started this whole story, banned from competitive football less than 10 years ago. And here's a question almost nobody asks. Once a 14-year-old's body has been measured 1,250 times a second for years, who actually owns that information? Not the highlight reel, the actual data, the sprint counts, the injury risk patterns, the acceleration profile that quietly predicts how his knees might hold up at 25. The club collecting it has a clear answer. The kid wearing the vest, in most cases, never even gets asked, which makes you wonder what gets lost when talent stops being something you watch and starts being something you measure. The player who looks slow but reads the game 2 steps ahead of everyone else, does he even get a trial anymore if his sprint count doesn't hit the right number on a spreadsheet? Football didn't just adopt a new piece of equipment, it quietly changed what it means to be discovered. And the vest was just the beginning. In 2023, the people who run this approval process quietly expanded it again. For the first time, wearable sensors built into boots and ankle supports, not just chest vests, could get the same official certification.
The tracking is moving off the torso and down into the body itself, into the parts of a player that actually touch the ball. Think about what that opens up. Right now, the vest can tell a coaching staff how fast a player ran and how far. A sensor built into the boot can tell them something far more specific, the exact force behind a strike, the angle of contact on a first touch, the split-second difference between a clean tackle and a mistimed one. There's already technology doing exactly this in academies right now, calling itself a player development system, measuring touch quality and striking power down to a level no scout standing on a touchline could ever judge by eye. It's the difference between knowing someone can run and knowing exactly how they play. And it's not just happening to the players. If you've watched our video on the official match ball this tournament, you already know it's carrying its own sensors too, tracking contact points in real time for the video assistant referee. Which means, for the first time in football's history, both the ball and the bodies kicking it are being measured simultaneously, every second, by systems most fans will never think to look for. Put those two pieces together and you start to see where this is actually heading. Not a single band vest anymore. An entire instrumented version of the sport, running quietly underneath the one you're watching. Boots that know how you strike, vests that know how you tire. A ball that knows the exact moment it left your foot. None of it visible. All of it feeding decisions that shape who plays, who gets rested, and who gets signed. 100 years ago, this would have been science fiction. 10 years ago, most of it was still illegal. Now, it's just Tuesday training at a World Cup camp. So ordinary that the players barely think about the gear anymore, even while it quietly builds a permanent file on every move they make. Which leaves one real question. If a machine can already predict which 14-year-old is worth signing and which veteran is 2 sprints away from a hamstring tear, how much longer until it's not just informing the decisions, but making them? That's not a future problem. Based on where this technology has gone in the last decade, it's closer than most people watching this tournament would guess. If you're still here with me at this point, watching how deep this thing actually goes, I want to ask you to do one thing. Hit subscribe and come back every day this tournament. We're pulling apart a different hidden story like this one every single time, and most of them never make it into a single highlight reel.
Here's what I want to know from you. Now that you know that Vest is recording 1,250 data points a second on every player you're watching, does it change anything for you? Would you actually want that kind of data tracked on your own body every time you went for a run or played a pickup game with your friends? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. All right, back to it. Because there's a piece of this that the data still can't explain, and it might be the most important part of the Hey story. For all 1,250 readings a second, for every accuracy ranking, and every quality program mortification, there's one thing none of these vests have ever measured. The decision a player makes in the half second before he gets the ball, whether he plays it safe or whether he tries something nobody in that stadium expects. You can track a sprint. You can't track courage. Look back at the biggest moments in this tournament so far, the goals everyone's still talking about. Not one of them happened because a spreadsheet told a player to take that shot. They happened because in a split second the data couldn't predict, a human being decided to trust himself anyway. That's the part the technology hasn't caught up to. Maybe it never will.
Every team at this World Cup has access to roughly the same numbers now. The vests are everywhere. The quality program has leveled the playing field on data. Two players can have nearly identical readouts, the same top speed, the same sprint count, the same recovery rate, and still produce completely different careers because one of them has something in his decision-making the sensors were never built to see. Coaches know this, even if they never admit it out loud in a press conference full of numbers. Ask any scout who's been doing this for 30 years what actually separates a good player from a great one, and eventually, after all the talk about data, he'll say something that has nothing to do with a vest at all. Instinct, nerve, the willingness to want the ball at the worst possible moment, when missing means everyone in the stadium will remember it. Which means, after everything this technology has changed about how football works behind the scenes, the part that actually wins a World Cup might be the one thing it still can't put a number on.
Go back to where we started. That bump at the back of a player's neck, right where the collar meets the spine. You know what it is now. You know what it's recording, who's reading the numbers, how far back the file on that player actually goes. You know it was illegal for almost a century, and you know exactly why that changed. So here's what's strange. Now that you know all of it, watch the next celebration that happens in this tournament. A player scores. He rips off his jersey without thinking, the way players have done it for 100 years before any of this technology existed. For half a second, before the referee books him and he pulls the shirt back down, you'll see that black vest again. Except this time, you'll see it differently. 1,250 readings a second, a public accuracy ranking, a quality program stamp, a decade of data stretching back to when he was 14 years old. All of it sitting on the most surveilled athletes in the history of the sport.
And in that exact same half second, he's not thinking about any of it. He's just a man who scored a goal, doing the thing every kid who's ever played this sport on a crack street or a back garden does without anyone teaching them to. Arms out, shirt off, nothing measured, nothing tracked, just the moment itself. Somewhere on a server, that exact moment is already being logged. Heart rate, sprint distance in the build-up, the acceleration that got him into the box a half step ahead of the defender. But none of that is what you remember when you think about a goal like that. You remember his face. You remember the run to the corner flag. The technology captured everything about how he got there, and somehow still missed the only part that actually mattered to you. That's the whole contradiction, right there in plain sight on every replay for anyone who knows where to look. If this one opened your eyes a little, do two things for me. Follow the channel so you don't miss the next one, and send this to 3 people who watch this World Cup with you. The kind of stuff hiding in plain sight like this only gets seen if someone passes it along. Leave me an honest comment too. Not just great video. Tell me what actually stuck with you, even if it's just that one image of the vest under the jersey. And while you're down there, tell me what you want pulled apart next. There's a lot more hiding under the surface of this tournament than anyone's telling you. I'm Leo. This is Footy Leo. I'll see you in the next one.